Hello and welcome. Do freebies, the promise of free electricity, free water, free rice, free mixie grinders, decide who you vote for? Well, the Aam Aadmi Party certainly seems to think so. As Arvind Kejriwal spreads his wings beyond Delhi, let's take a look at some of the promises the Delhi Chief Minister is making in other states. Whether it is Goa, whether it is states like Punjab, or whether it is states like Uttarakhand, three of the recent states that Mr. Kejriwal has made forays into, the promise is the same. The Delhi model of free electricity is what is being promised ahead of critical polls, especially in the state of Punjab. Is this a model that can work? Is that why, in fact, people of Delhi have voted for Kejriwal? Well, Arvind Kejriwal clearly believes that it's one of the key reasons. Now, of course, the Aam Aadmi Party is not the only party to promise freebies. Perhaps the state most identified with the political culture of freebies has been the southern state of Tamil Nadu. Are freebies bad economics and good politics? Or are freebies actually bad economics and bad politics as well? Do they create a kind of pressure on the system that is almost impossible then for a state and for any government to actually sustain? That's our big question on the program today. And let us introduce our guests straight away. Let's bring them up, please. You can see Professor Arun Kumar, well-known economist on the screen. Welcome, Arunji. Gurcharan Das, author, commentator, and of course, one of our finest minds on all things concerned with the economy is with us. Yashwant Deshmukh, our favorite psephologist and political analyst with a very fascinating daily news tracker, is with us. We're also joined by Professor Partha Mukhopadhyay of the Center for Policy Research, and Anjali Rai, leader of the Aam Aadmi Party, is with us to tell us why the Aam Aadmi Party is so convinced that this is what distinguishes them from other parties. Yashwant, let me start with you, because I think more than anyone else, you understand the political benefits, if any, of this culture of freebies. The problem, of course, with freebies is they're easily, unlike ideology or personality, they're easy to imitate. If one person comes up with a set of freebies, the other person can match it. And this is what we've seen happening in states like Tamil Nadu, which begs the question, do people actually vote on the basis of freebies?
Well, they do actually, Barkha. We have seen many examples where I won't say that becomes the only reason that they vote for it, but that certainly becomes a motivator to go in certain direction. And if there is a string or a series of such announcements, it becomes kind of a compulsion for the next incumbent whomsoever is trying to capture power eventually in that way, that he has to do one up, he or she has to do one up on what has been promised. So we have seen that, Tamil Nadu big time. And whether or not, economically speaking, that kind of impacted the exchequer in a way that took the state down, the state economy down, that is something for the honorable other panel members to answer, because they know it better. In my limited understanding, however, I could sense on freebies, there are freebies and there are different set of freebies. A color TV freebie is very different from a freebie of free electricity or water.
So analyze how much of that you think has been part of Kejriwal's success. There have been many stages to Kejriwal's political trajectory. One, of course, is an anti-corruption crusader, then as a self-made middle-class man, a professional, then, of course, placing education and electricity and power as issues at the center of his governance. Now he's taking this to other states. How do you think it's going to go down?
I think the first mandate that Kejriwal got, clear mandate. I'm not talking about 2013, but I'm talking about 2015 when he won 67. The impact of freebies in that mandate was zero, big zero. I believe that was a complete mandate for a full throttle transformation. Hum rajniti badalne aaye hain kind of thing. But definitely the second mandate of Kejriwal had. I would like to give almost 50% of that mandate had a lot to do with the freebies, the free electricity, free water, particularly, and now it has become a benchmark of sort. Without realizing, for other states or other parties or politicians that Delhi is a very special state, and probably they can they can think of for freebies in lot many creative ways than what others did. For example, in Punjab, Barkha, I remember way back when Manpreet Badal was the finance minister under senior Badal Saab,
Yeah.
and in one of the conversations, he told me that the biggest challenge that he has, that the free electricity to farmer that has been promised, and that is fiscally is something which is just not tenable. It's not possible. He said that it's practically impossible to do that, if you are doing it that way. And that was one of those reasons, apart from the personal family bickerings, it was
Yeah.
one of the things that actually forced
So,
Manpreet to
so,
take
so,
a
so
stand.
what? So what I'm hearing you say is that it would be easier for the Aam Aadmi Party to sustain the power and water promises in Delhi, which is small and controlled, than in other states. Is
Possible.
your
They
sense?
can even sustain that in Uttarakhand probably, because Uttarakhand is a power surplus state.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that is sustainable in a bigger state.
Okay.
Goa,
Let.
possible.
Yeah.
I don't know. But for a bigger state, I don't know if it is sustainable.
Gurcharan Das, what is that line between welfareism? After all, if you look at what's happening around the world right now, you have countries that are offering compensation, social security, furloughs while lockdowns take place. They're smaller countries, they're richer countries than India, but that could also be called a freebie. What is the difference between that and what Kejriwal is promising? And do you think that this is now something that all political parties will eventually have to imitate? Because once one party does it, it's very difficult
Yeah.
for another party to explain to voters why it's a bad idea.
Well, this is what gives politicians a bad name. I'm a classical liberal. I grew up with the belief that the state's job was to create the enabling conditions for prosperity, and that happens when you have investment. Investment creates jobs, jobs create prosperity. Now, the problem I have is with the left liberals, and Kejriwal is a left liberal. And he's like the Roman politicians in 180 BC, who first hit upon this idea when they were going to lose in the Republic. They started giving away free food, circuses. It was called bread and circus. You might remember from your history lesson. But this is really another divide. We talk about the different divides in our society. And it's I mean, everything that that Mr. Deshmukh has said is correct. I mean, the reality is that it forces you for the next politician to give more. And the Tamil Nadu is the most surprising example, because it's one of our more prosperous states. It's our better educated states. It's our better governed states. Its civil service has always been somehow superior in delivery. And yet it's Tamil Nadu which has gone to the most ridiculous extent in this.
Yeah.
And DMK claims that they won because of color TVs. And that's why ADMK promised mixies and Mangal Sutras, 4 grams of gold, and all these other things. Now, what is the answer? We teach our children that first, it's like a state is really like a home. We teach our children that first you must produce, first you must earn, then you can spend, then you can consume. And this culture of entitlement destroys that idea, and people begin to believe that the state's job is to give me things free. Now,
but isn't it the state's job? Aren't there certain things that the state is obliged to provide its citizens, like education, like health?
Goods. Yeah,
yes.
We call them
so
public.
Is electricity not a public good? I'm just putting it out there. Is electricity not a public good?
No, it's a good question, and I would say that what Kejriwal is doing is something a little bit different from from the Punjab case, where they gave away free power and they gave away, I mean, he's giving only 300 units. So at least he's limiting the cost. And that's very important. And because the Punjab actually destroyed its finances, it's destroyed its soil through free power and through free electricity. And Haryana actually went ahead of Punjab up to that in per capita income.
So you basically
I was just saying, you know, is the answer the courts? Well, the courts, this came up, you know, Supreme Court had a hearing that somebody was very upset and Mayawati spending the state's good money on her statues for herself. And the Supreme Court said, well, look, sorry, this is democracy and you just vote her out the next time she comes up for election. And that's the court's so far as I know.
Well, you also had the Madras High Court say that that the culture of freebies has made the people of Tamil Nadu lazy. But before I go to Professor Arun Kumar and also get Partha and the Aam Aadmi Party leader Anjali, Yashwant, a quick political question to you. If indeed freebies have political benefits, how does one distinguish one party's freebies from the other? Tamil Nadu is a classic case of a certain amount of cancelling out of each other when it comes to the freebie culture.
Well, having said that, you know, they do have an impact, but Barkha, I'm still a firm believer that particularly in terms of election mandate, people make up their mind on many things. You know, it's a cumulative decisions on so many things, and when they take when they decide on maybe not to elect somebody in, but to throw somebody out, you know, that has nothing to do with the freebies. So I am always fascinated by the anti-incumbent verdicts, you know, and I always believe that it's a crux of any democratic norm in terms of freedom. So yes, to win in or win for the first time as a novelty factor or something, yes, it could work. But I genuinely don't believe that freebies actually can result in an anti-incumbent verdict.
I think that's very interesting, that once there's anger, it cannot stop the anger.
Yeah, it cannot stop. Yeah, so there is a limitation to that, whatever it brings on the table.
Professor Kumar, your take. The promise of a finite amount of free electricity is the Kejriwal formula for political expansion. He's made the same promise in all the 3 states he's gone to. There's nothing to stop every party then from promising the same, in which case he actually loses his distinctiveness with this promise. But from an economics point of view, Professor Kumar.
So, you know, it's bad economics and bad politics, you know, what's going on in the country. At the moment, you know, we have large poverty, and the pandemic has brought that out, which says that 80% don't have enough money even to buy 1 week's supply. That means 80% subsist at the border, you know. And, you know, whether it be electricity or water or it be education or health, these are critical things which need to be provided to every citizen. So in a sense, what we see is that what Kejriwal is pointing to is that we need to give these things to the poor people for them to survive. Now, it obviously has an economic cost, you know, and all subsidies have an economic cost. So, you know, saying something is free means you are giving a complete subsidy on that. Whereas, you know, subsidies can be of different kind, whether they be on food or whether they be on other things. So the nature of our politics is that we have top-down policies. These top-down policies mean we take care of the well-off sections, we give to them, they make all the gains. And if you look at the disparities in the country, then 1% have roughly 50% of the wealth, they earn 30% of the incomes, you know. So in other words, disparities being as large as they are, the trickle down is very low. So the policies that we have are not trickling down, and that's why poverty persists. And therefore,
so in this context, do you think free electricity up to X number of units is a good idea?
No. So I would say that, you know, it's not a good idea to give freebies, but it's better to do investment, as Gurcharan was saying. That would be better. But the kind of investment is very important. All the investment, you know, we have unorganized and the organized sector. 80% of investment goes into the organized sector, and that's not generating jobs because their automation is increasing. And post-pandemic, this automation is increasing even further. and large number of unorganized sector people have lost employment, as the recent data suggests. So therefore, in a sense, you need to provide support to the unorganized sector who've lost incomes and employment. And this, jobless growth that's taking place is part of the problem. So the kind of economic policies that we are pursuing, which are all top down, where basically people are not able to get jobs, people are living at the subsistence level, and you can see in the unorganized sector the kind of work people do is basically bare labor, and that's not going to get you enough money for a sustenance.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the politicians see an opportunity. But as you rightly said, there's big competitive politics. In the competitive politics, you undo what one does to the other. But the question is,
yeah,
the question
sorry.
also is, what would it cost in the budget? And the budget cost would be very high. There's absolutely no doubt. State governments' budgets are already in pain because you see of the GST collections being lower, because
Yeah.
transfers from the centers have not taken place to the extent that they need to be done. So in other words, states' budgets will be in trouble. Centers' budgets will also be in trouble. There's absolutely no doubt. So I think it's all bad economics and bad politics, where we are looking at top-down approach rather than a broad-based approach in which everybody gets a productive employment. So productive
for the
employment is the
broad-based,
key.
yeah, but the broad-based approach, of course, is not a quick fix solution. When politicians enter election season, they want quick fix, easy, digestible ideas. Partha Mukhopadhyay, I was just going to go to Anjali, but we lost her there. So let me just get Partha Mukhopadhyay to respond, and then Anjali, we hope the line remains stable with you, and we can get your perspective. Mr. Mukhopadhyay, sir, please go ahead. And can we unmute him, please? Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I'm actually a little different as far as from what I'm hearing. I actually think in many respects, freebies can be pretty good economics because a lot of that is very good in capital, human capital. So when you talked about giving cycles for girls to go to school, televisions, the big story in Tamil Nadu, research out there, and this is coming out of India, coming out of Pakistan, out of Bangladesh, seems to indicate that it has had significant effect on both women's health, domestic violence, as well as fertility, which is one of the issues that is currently in the news. So what you have is a situation where a number of these particular quoting things that we call freebies may actually be relatively sensible policies. For example, I would make bus rides completely free in Delhi, right? Because that essentially, if you're going to try and promote public transport structures, maybe have a price and say 200 rupees a month, and you can take as many trips as you want. A variety of these structures. The question is, however, how do you finance it? Now, in Delhi, Kejriwal was lucky, and he managed to, which has the resources to be able to support these kinds of transfers to certain people. However, in other states that you're talking about, those budgets may not be able to bear the burden of these kinds of stuff. So then
I think what I'm hearing you,
what do you give up?
Yeah, and what would you give up? Because, for example, there are questions on from our audience live stream saying, why would Kejriwal not just remove, for example, or reduce the tax on fuel instead? That is something that people would prefer. Before I come back to our panel, Anjali, I know you've been waiting for a while to speak.
Reduce the tax fuel?
Well, I think people are saying, Partha Mukhopadhyay, that they would prefer that to a subsidized power, maybe.
The people who drive cars, you don't want them to particularly, they're the ones who should be paying for public transport in Delhi.
Okay, so this is also a question. Who is the subsidy targeted at, and is it really benefiting the poorest people? I think Delhi actually is an example where you go into many slum tenements, and the one thing, I don't know if Yashwant will agree with me, when you ask about Kejriwal in Delhi, they do talk about the electricity and they do talk about the government schools. But Anjali, this model may not be one replicable in other states. Two, आप करेंगे तो बाकी भी करेंगे, तो फिर आपके बारे में अलग क्या रहा?
देखिए, first of all, I would like to say that I can't hear everybody properly. I just assume कि आप लोग क्या-क्या कह रहे हैं, and you were talking about freebies given in other states like gold and TVs and all. But we are not giving such freebies. We are talking about giving the basic amenities like electricity and water. Water, which is right to life. And electricity should also be right to life. And any welfare state should try to provide these basic amenities, and we are trying to do that only. And if Aam Aadmi Party is able to save money by running judiciously and ending up corruption, saving money, and then spending that saved money on the benefits of poor people, then what is wrong in that? We are only talking about giving free electricity or water. We are not going to give free laptop or free gold or anything else. Welfare state, I think it should be the duty of any welfare state to do this. And in such a difficult time, when we are all are battling with COVID, unemployment is on rise, and poor people are becoming more poor, rich are but becoming more rich, and people are not able to get proper food. At this time, if we are talking to give some relief to people, what is wrong in that? Just tell me.
Okay, I think you've raised a very interesting question, which is the nature of what's being offered. And I think that's the point, Gurcharan, that Partha Mukhopadhyay also made. Anjali, we'll come back to you. You have made the gist of your argument, even though you can't hear us very well. We've understood you and we've heard you well. Gurcharan, I think this is the point that Partha was also making, that when Nitish Kumar says all girls to get free cycles, there is a purpose to it. So more girls go to school. When the Tamil Nadu parties say we'll give direct cash benefits to women in households, there's the hope that you're providing women some money that doesn't automatically go to their husbands. So some social good may be tied into freebies. Would you still oppose them? When Anjali says that, look, we're not offering rice, atta, mixie, TV. We're offering electricity at a time of rising inflation and during a very difficult time. What's wrong? What would you say?
Well, it is. I mean, it is a question of where you draw the line. Partha seemed to suggest that actually color TVs were a public good because they did a lot of good in the surveys that he was quoting in terms of reducing domestic violence, etc. And this is the problem really is that once you open, like, I could argue that the chief minister of Andhra Pradesh was one of the first ones who gave almost free rice for the people. And he's, according to his mind, rice was really the public good. Free rice was the public good, right?
Yeah.
Food. So, I mean, education, health, water, and then you can move on to I think we should be grateful that he has capped the electricity to 300 units. Now, I can live with the thought that first 300 units could be a public good. But, if it's a license like in Punjab, where it was offered free and air conditioners were running in the villages, I mean, I remember going to visit a friend of mine, and all his rooms were air conditioned with free electricity in a farmhouse in Punjab. Now, that's what created the problem. So, the moral question that's difficult, Barkha, I mean, the economic question is it costs money, and you have to cut something else, and therefore we should choose what is important. Are we going to invest in creating jobs which will be sustainable, or are we going to give?
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're giving up something to make that subsidy possible, and you're giving up something that is also of public good. But Yashwant,
Can I just quickly make a point? The moral issue for me is that we should not get into a culture, as many Western countries did, a culture of such enlightenment that generations of families then lived off welfare. And also it was a system whereby my colleague, when I was running Procter & Gamble India, he was running Procter & Gamble China. He was a German. He left the company earning $1 million a year, And the freebie that he got, the welfare system was such that he was given $750,000 in
Yeah.
as a welfare
Yeah, I
payment.
hear you. I hear you. I
That's a
hear
bad
you.
thing,
I,
you know.
I hear you
So
that those who don't need it end up getting benefits. But I think, Yashwant, there is something interesting in what the Aam Aadmi Party is arguing, that we are not being populist because our freebies are very confined. There's a restricted list of what we're talking about. I still don't get why others would not imitate it, but I think they have a good argument that we're not being Tamil Nadu parties. We're not even saying laptops. Even the laptops in the age of online education could certainly be argued as a public good. But go ahead, Yashwant.
Well, Barkha, on 12th, actually, I was just asking my team what we have asked. On 12th, in the news tracker, I mean, just 4 days back, we had asked two questions on this particular thing. And first question was directly that, if giving the freebie has become a election winning formula, and almost 51% people said yes, 35% disagreed to it. But what was more interesting to me was about 55% people saying that the providing free electricity actually affects the revenue of the state, which in turn affects the essential services that are being provided to public. So what I'm trying to say, more than the people who are saying that, oh yeah, it's a good thing, there is even a bigger number of people across India who are saying that it's fine, you are giving it free, but please take into the account that where is this money coming from, and is it going to affect something else? पैसा कहीं से आप खर्च कर रहे हो तो कहीं तो काटोगे ना. This is something. What is interesting, Barkha, is that we generally feel that the masses are always going gaga about the freebies, and they don't really want to look into the thing because they are not the economists, for God's sake. But it's not like that. Even the layman understands that you cannot spend the money that you don't have.
But often they can see the political intent, but they'll still lap up the freebie. It's like people saying that
Exactly.
like in
Exactly.
election rallies where alcohol is distributed, people go and have a drink and then vote for who they want to.
Exactly. So, and coming from UP, Barkha, I mean, in my home state, I know for sure, I mean, ever since I remember, the question was not if you are giving free electricity. The question was always, bijli do.
Right.
We will pay for it, 24 ghante bijli do. So the issue was not about how cheap the electricity is or free the electricity is. Issue was uninterrupted 24-hour supply of the free of electricity.
Right.
So,
right.
so I think it also Barkha, it changes from state to state. The fine line, as my dad always used to say, that the line between luxury and necessity is really thin. So if India is such an abstract of different state and populations. In the western state where probably in Maharashtra and in Gujarat, the 24-hour supply was not that big an issue, but in UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, these belt, it was always an issue. Roads were an issue. So I don't know. I mean, just to think that freebies are going to do a blanket service, I mean, in a way, I doubt that public is going to accept it that way. They certainly appreciate it, and at bottom of the pyramid, Barkha, and particularly in the metropolitan areas where we know almost a third of the population is really bottom of the pyramid.
That's what I was going to say. That in Delhi's slum tenements, at least if you sort of question, one of the reasons for voting Kejriwal is these freebies.
It's not one of the reasons, Barkha. That was
it's the reason. Okay, Professor Kumar. Professor Kumar, please. Can we unmute him?
Yeah, the question is that how do you raise resources, as everybody is pointing out? Because as societies become complex, there are more and more market failures. And when you have market failures, then you have to subsidize those for optimality. Now, therefore, say electricity, if people are not able to afford electricity, then you have to subsidize it. Now giving 300 units, up to 300 units free, and anything above 300 units, then you charge. So those who are poor, who consume less than 300 units, they get the subsidy. Those who are better off, who consume more than that, they don't get the subsidy, you know. Similarly for water, similarly for education and health. These are all areas of market failure where I think the state needs to come in. But the question is, you know, how do we finance it? We finance it using indirect taxes mostly, because indirect taxes are 2/3 of the total tax collection, whereas direct taxes are only 1/3, and indirect taxes tend to be regressive. So in other words, the burden falls on the poor people again. So we need to raise resources through the direct taxes to be able to finance some of these things. But of course, there's such a large amount of black economy that you don't get enough of the resources from direct taxes. So in other words, the burden falls on inflation then, and inflation then hurts the poor people again. So in a sense, you have a vicious cycle in which you try and do these kind of things, and then they lead to some kind of inflation, which then affects the poor people all over again. And their lot doesn't seem to improve. You know, so in the long run, you know, unless you improve, you know, productive investment and employment generation, you know, then their lot would not improve, and therefore they'll remain where they are in a sense. And that's what you see over the last, say, 60, 70 years.
But do you think if we can come out of these graphics, they're basically looking at states where the Aam Aadmi Party is making a play. But Professor Kumar, briefly, do you think people see it that way? Because a politician is not thinking like this. A politician is thinking what's going to make me win.
So the common man will think only of today. He's only thinking of what can I get today, because I don't. I think most people feel that the politicians don't deliver, and therefore, if I can get something today, that's good. In the long run, whether we are getting more prosperous or not, I don't think people believe that they're going to get more prosperous. So today, whatever you can get, you get, and therefore there's competitive politics, and all politicians would tend to promise that. But I think that the key is we need to change our policies, generate more productive employment. When people have more incomes in their hand, then you won't need to subsidize many of the things that you subsidize, except where market failure is there. Like, you know, Partha pointed out, for bus, for instance, I would prefer buses to cars. So those kind of things, of course, you know, need to be subsidized.
Okay, let me get Partha and then Anjali, and then we will have to basically close quite quickly. Partha, you said that not all subsidies are poor public policies. Are you convinced by the Aam Aadmi Party argument that electricity, to that extent, is a public good?
I'm not convinced that 300 units is necessary, even though Gurcharan is. Perhaps the levels may be lower. These are actually, but fundamentally at that level, that is a political decision. That is, and secondly, as Yashwant was saying, it's important that you make the case about what you are giving up to essentially carry on this fashion. Because right now, states do not have any control over revenues, because most of the taxation powers of the states are extremely limited, because they're essentially limited only to petrol and to property. And consequently, what you have to say is you'll have to convince people that I am not cutting back on, let's say, the number of nurses that you will see in the hospitals because I'm going to give you free electricity, right? So that choice that is being made as to what I'm giving up to give you this is the political communication that needs to be done. And essentially, it is in that package of communication across different political parties that I think people will be able to make informed choices. So each of these is essentially, just like anything else, you have a certain amount of revenue that comes into the government. The government then decides how to spread this, how to spend it. Some of the things that we often call freebies are actually investments in human capital. A lot of the conversation here has been talking about investment. Investment is most of the time not the government's issue. It's the private investment that's supposed to sort of take up the jobs. Government is no longer building factories. We're getting out of doing business. So consequently, what government needs to do is to ensure that the space that is there and the people have the skills to be able to succeed in a market economy. Because that's what we are in at this point in time. And
well, at this point in time,
to help that is something that I think the government should support.
Anjali, very quickly, we have to close. Last word to you. I think the argument being made is that you're going to have to cut spending on something to enable this freebie. And that something then cannot be another public good that you're compromising on.
We have cut on corruption. We have ended up the corruption, and we have saved the money we are focusing on social sector. We want to give better education to our children. We want to give better health facilities to poor people. And similarly, we want to give light, electricity and water to poor people. And I don't think that we have missed out at anything. And we are a welfare state which is working for the welfare of the
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. What I hear is that we, irrespective of what the economists and the others are arguing, we are going to see very soon, in a few months from now, a season of competitive promises made by politicians. We are well and truly, I don't know if we're into the third wave or not, but we're very well and truly into the election season. That's for sure. Leaving it there to Gurcharan, Arun, Partha, and Yashwant and Anjali. Thank you, and to our audience. See you in a bit. We've got a lot more coming up on the Mojo Story. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.